Okay, so thank you so much for signing on and for being here, even though it's windy and rainy. We're going to cover a lot of years this class and try to tie up some of the loose ends from the prior weeks and see where our story finds us. Okay, this is as we've been discussing American Modern Orthodoxy. The first class we focused on the Mechitza as Orthodoxy and conservative Judaism emerged as distinct denominations in North America in the 50s and 60s. Last week, we looked at the emergence of day schools, which coincided with Orthodoxy retaining a committed observant core as the vast numbers of non-observant Orthodox Jews mostly vanished or went elsewhere. It's a great kiddush up in the sky, whatever. But and and this week, our story, as our curtain opens, we have Orthodoxy as about stable 10% of American Judaism, and most people who are affiliated with Orthodox congregations, Orthodox communities, are themselves Shomer Shabbos, either products of day schools or sending their kids to day schools. All is well, except there's still lots of ferment and controversies, and I want to focus on some of those controversies. I mean, I guess a different class could have ignored the controversies and spoken about the creative achievements. I think the controversies are kind of interesting though, and I think I guess that's sort of the common thread that we've been examining is how does a community define itself? And I think that's a question that sort of weighs on us today. How does a community define ourselves? What are our boundaries? What do those boundaries signify? What's the importance, or how do we think of the importance of having these types of boundaries? So we'll have a very, very long timeline. We'll sort of go through it, and that'll help us orient ourselves for the story. This was sort of fun to put together. Okay, 1953. Soloveitchik, writing about the Maimonides High School, endorses a co-education with an equal curriculum for boys and girls through high school, including Torah Sheba'al Peh, including a Talmud, oral Torah. And that sort of sets the stage for a certain segment of American or Orthodox day schools, giving girls and young women equal Torah educations, which as you mentioned last week, I think education and textual fluency and literacy is, like in American context, certainly the key to living like an empowered Jewish life, right? You can, like this bookshelf can give you guidance or not, and it's open to you or it's closed to you. And so I think that's really very significant. And I think there'll be sort of in terms of issues of feminism and orthodoxy, there are really two parallel tracks, which sometimes cross and sometimes don't. One is advancing the boundaries of higher education available to women or the educational roles open to women. And the other is ritual innovation and expanding public ritual opportunities for women. And those are really separate parallel tracks that sometimes converge and sometimes go their separate directions. So 1972, on Simchas Torah, the first women's hakafot and Torah reading took place at Lincoln Square Synagogue on Simchas Torah. Riskin tells the story in his little book, his little memoir. It's a very interesting memoir. He says at the beginning, it's a collection of he wrote his memoirs in the form of a series of inspiring stories. So most of us, our lives don't quite work that way, but that's how he organized this memoir. And he says, it's the best of my ability. This is how I remember that, if it didn't happen exactly this way, it sort of should have, but whatever. So he's sort of telling you, don't fact check me, but this is how I remember these stories. They're all inspiring. I found it a very entertaining book. Some of my kids have read it too. It's like they're like shul book. It's a good shul book. So he talks about this story about these women who went to see him on this Shemini Atzeret evening, asking to convene for Hakafot and to read from the Torah on Simchas Torah morning. He wasn't able to consult with anyone. He stayed up late doing research best he could in his home, and he endorsed the practice. Became very controversial in Manhattan, in the following weeks. He spoke to Rav Soloveitchik, who was alive and very much his teacher, who said it was fine what you did, and maybe I would have, it's fine what you did, and I'll go and speak to you at your shul and give a shiur there. It's lest anyone, doubt the Orthodox credentials of your synagogue. Rav Riskin then spoke to Rav Moshe Feinstein, who said, if you had asked me before, I would have told you not to do it because maybe you can maintain this practice within acceptable halachic boundaries, but other rabbis might not be able to do so. But since you did it already, and if you weren't to do it next year, there would be women who would leave your shul and would leave Orthodoxy. You have to keep doing it. And the Babich Rebbe also said, he was spoke to Babich Rebbe, who Riskin had a very close relationship with him over a period of years, who said also that in your synagogue, in your context, you have to do this. This is how you're going to engage people in Jewish life, in your sort of outreach-oriented synagogue in the West Side, and so it continued. 1974, Rabbi Goren wrote a private letter endorsing women's tefillah groups. And we're going to pause here and sort of see, there's a description I have from Rivka Hout. This is from, oh, sorry, I forgot to share with you guys on the, hold on, sorry. I have all this stuff for you too, just because you're online you don't deserve the, okay, I mean, okay, let me share with you, I apologize. Okay, so this is the, there you go. Oh, wait, no, sorry. Uh, there you go. Okay. And then I also want to show you, no, I also want to show you, no, no, I want to, yeah, where is it? A letter by Rivka Hout. Those of you in the room have it already. The rest, here it is. Okay. This is from the textbook of the history of modern Orthodoxy that was created by Dr. Zev Elif, who is now in Philadelphia. Okay, I think that's so she in 1985 she wrote describing what it is. They had an orpha for her sister. It was wonderful, and she says women praying together is not new. It happens in Beis Yaakov. It happens in yeshiva. There's no reason why women can't hold and carry Sifrei Torah. And yet in Orthodox shuls, women have no contact with the Sefer Torah. Many shuls, women can't even see it. And there's a need she feels for women to have contact, physical contact with it. That's with the Torah. Do you mind? Do you have look? Yeah. How sad it is that these rabbis have chosen this issue for their particular attention at a time when the religious community is faced with so many serious problems. What are we focusing on, right? Like our today's rabbinic leaders have chosen to attack the very group that are instrumental in bringing so many women closer to Torah observance. And this is 85, so this is when the practice had already aroused controversy. But she was one of the founders and one of the strong advocates for women's tefillah as a form of prayer. Hello. Here, like that, and you can, yeah, okay. 1976, Rabbi Ravender opens Madreshet Lindenbaum, also a pioneering institution for higher education for women. 1978, the Women's Tefillah Group begins regular meetings at the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale. 1979, Rabbi David Silber starts Drisha. The Institute for Jewish Education was a women's Institute of Advanced Study for Women in New York. In 1984, four Rosh Yeshiva University condemn, they call it women's minyanim, which is a very loaded term. In other words, the advocates say it's a women's tefillah group, very careful to say it's not a minyan because there were women praying with other women. The detractors call it women's minyanim as a way to kind of highlight that what they find so offensive about it. 1988, Leah Shaktiel sues to join a local religious council in Israel. In Israel, religious functions are provided by the government. You have a local religious council appointed by your municipality, and they oversee the mikveh and the shuls and the cemetery and provide all religious functions. No women were on religious councils from, I guess, the establishment of the Rabbanut system in the 40s until 1988. She sued and she was placed on it, and many women have served since then. She lives in Yerucham, and she's like an important, still an important activist all these years later. In 1990, the Tonot Beit Din training programs establishes to train women to act as Tonot. Like a Tohen is an advocate in Batei Din. There are no lawyers, no attorneys don't exist in the Jewish legal system. So a Tohen, though, is somebody you could hire who's trained to make good arguments on your behalf in a Beit Din. So there's a 1990, Rabbi Riskin started this program to train women to be Tonot, to sort of come to advocate on behalf of their clients in Batei Din. And that within the Beit Din. In 1990, Rabbi Avi Weiss publishes Women at Prayer, which is his book-length defense of women's tefillah movements in response to the 1984 condemnation by the Rosh Yeshiva. In 1997, the Vad Rabbanim of Queens forbids women's tefillah groups. Rabbi Simcha Kraus, who's some people here, his daughter lived here for a while. When he was a rabbi in Queens, there was a bat mitzvah that was convened as a women's tefillah group, and the Queens Rabbinic Council condemned it, and there was a whole little controversy in the late 90s. So I wanted to pause here and sort of say, just sort of say a little bit more about women's tefillah groups, sort of what were some of the arguments against, and sort of why they, I have that on this third page here. 5 halachic arguments against women's tefillah groups. These are from some of the that emerged from these mid 1980s YU Rosh Yeshiva. The first is that it's an incomplete fulfillment of mitzvot. Attending a women's tefillah group precludes women from praying with a minyan, right? Like if they come to shul and there's a minyan room 1 and room 2, there's no minyan. So you're like choosing the less good option when you have already available the best option. I think the two counter arguments to that critique. The first is that within halachic literature there are many precedents for other priorities that might supersede tefillah with a minyan, like davening with sunrise. Some people, instead of going to the minyan, they'll daven a little bit earlier, maybe a little bit later, and they'll time their amidah to coincide with sunrise. That's like a well-established reason not to daven with a minyan, to pray with better kavanah. Maybe you do that alone. You could spend 45 minutes on your amidah and no one's going to bother you. And that's also a well-established reason to pray without a minyan. And furthermore, I think this is important. There's no actual, in most communities or many Orthodox communities, there is no actual call any other occasion for women to come and pray with a minyan. It's not something that is usually or frequently, except for, like I do, but like most people don't, right? Most communities, it doesn't happen that women are encouraged, urged to come and pray with a minyan. And so they then turn around and say, and therefore, nonetheless, if you choose not to, but come to shul anyway and gather amongst yourselves, that's wrong. It seems unfair, right? In many shuls, the base medrash where like the Shabbos Mincha minyan meets, there is no women's section, or it might be, right? So it's not even possible, right? So it's to then say, shame on you for choosing not to pray with a minyan is, I think unfair. Second, they say it's ziyuf Torah, it's misrepresentation of the Torah. Participants in a women's tefillah group appear as though they are engaged in the mitzvah of Kriyat HaTorah, or it appears as though they're praying with a minyan, when really from our internal halachic perspective, they're not. And that's misrepresenting the Torah. But misrepresentation, counter-argument, is that can't occur if you don't violate Jewish law, right? You're not pretending to do anything that you're not. Torah scrolls are suitable tools for Torah study, and to read from a Torah is a permissible act to do. So you're not you're not presenting yourself. You're not as though you're doing something else. You're just doing something permissible, right? Yeah.
Just wondering, for the mitzvah Talmud Torah, is there any shiur in using actual Torah?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Like, well, yeah. So I'm not aware of any like classic sources that say it's great to use a Torah scroll for your Torah study, and in fact, there's actually an interesting history of this. That Jews
There are arguments not to
embrace the technology of the book, right? There's a history of like how like my wife teaches about this a lot. The technology by which Torah has been transmitted has changed over the centuries, like from scroll to codex to printed book. Like we were really, really eager to embrace the book, but we reserve the scroll technology for like ritual purposes, not really usually for study. But
on a podcast
that's very possible. This is one of her like stump speeches. But as someone who lanes, you know that the process of taking a section of Torah and learning it well enough to lane it from a scroll is actually a very profound form, I believe, of Torah study, right? Like you know those psukim like really in your kishkas in a very deep, hopefully, in a very, very deep way, right? In a very, very deep way. So I would say that exercise of preparing the laning is actually is a very special form of Torah study, I would say. 3, they say it's splitting the community because there's a concept of Barov Am Hadrak Melech. It's better for everyone to be together doing a mitzvah together than in small groups. And so, right, it's better for a mitzvah with large numbers of people. Then the women's tefillah group splits the community. But again, that's one hidur. That is one value, one priority of, let's have as many people in the room as possible doing a mitzvah together. But we have many, many other priorities that we sometimes balance. Like, I can daven better in the shtivel down the street, or I can daven. I want to daven at Nate's as the sun is rising, and so I'm going to go to this other. I'm going to go to the shul where they sing more, where they talk less, or where I can bring my kids and there's more noise, and that's more easy for me, right? Like, there's many other priorities that allow like more than one shul within walking distance. That's pretty common, right? So we don't actually prioritize Barov Hadran Melech above all else. Fourth, departure from customs and norms, but the innovation lacks any historic precedent and violates requirements to vigilantly protect established customs, right? But lack of evidence is not evidence of lack, is the response. In Hebrew, that's called Lora Inu Eino Right. Okay, the fact that we didn't see something, there's no precedent for something, doesn't mean that that's proof that the thing was deliberated and considered and then rejected, as opposed to if the thing was considered and then rejected. Okay, that's the beginning of your idea. Like, women? Mishnah says women can shecht, kill animals, slaughter animals ritually, but Shulchan Aruch says, I don't know, I haven't seen that. I guess not. That's we don't see something happening that does seem to be proof that maybe the halacha has moved to say that it's prohibited, but that's something that was presumably deliberated and discussed, whereas like a cadre of educated women didn't exist before the 20th century. And so really, without precedent, the fact that there is no precedent, without precedent for the factors that made the debate question possible, the lack of precedent is much less conclusive. And also, there is precedent for many of the innovations of women's tefillah. I think we even mentioned in the first class, there was in many European communities, it was a Weiber shul, a women's synagogue that was adjacent to the shul where men davened, and there was a little window in between. There was a leader in the women's synagogue who would kind of help keep pace and lead the prayers in the women's synagogue. And in Beis Yaakov school or girls' schools, there are women. The girls will pray together in their classrooms, right? In ways not all that different from a women's tefillah. So the framing is a little bit different, the motivation is a little bit different, but the actual core practices are quite similar. Finally, they say it's imitating Gentile mores. Women's prayer groups imitate non-Orthodox movements and are inspired by feminism. Rav Henkin said, responded to this argument by saying, actually, there is no non-Jewish religion that does anything remotely similar to women's tefillah groups. Like Christians don't. Christian women don't gather and take a Torah scroll out and lane it and then say the Amidah, right? So it's not, it's just not true, right? The Torah does not forbid movements but actions. Okay, so there's no to be like inspired by a movement, by a trend. Like that's not real halachic real halachic language. So and so with that background, there was again arguments to the voices from some of these Rosh Yeshiva were forbidding. You had some rabbis who were permitting, Goran among them, Riskin, etc. And the movement spread in the 80s and 90s as it did. Jordan is saying there are now all female-led Muslim prayers, but they start after the tefillah group. So I don't know if they have Muslims have a prohibition against imitating Jews, but that wouldn't be relevant for this for our halachic deliberations. We have more of everything. What do you?
They're more like the timeline.
Yes, lots. I'm sorry, I don't know staples, but they are many sheets. Yeah, many. Abundance of photocopies. Right. Yeah. Okay. And Soloveitchik in 1984, 85, as this was happening, he did not sign on that letter that four of his students did sign, condemning it. I was taught that was a conscious choice on his part not to sign the letter prohibiting it, that he felt, I don't think by the 80s he was not a fan of it, but he didn't think it was forbidden and didn't sign. That was one of the last public actions he took. He had some sort of Alzheimer's or dementia in the 80s, but he was still aware enough in 84 that his refusal to sign was significant. Okay, jumping back to our stories, that's the 90s. So that's the 90s. Okay, 1997, the first Jofa conference on feminism and orthodoxy took place. Is any of you there? Any chance? Okay. I try to remember if I don't 97. I was at one of these early conferences. I don't know if I was at that one, but I was at one of okay. What else happened? 1997, Columbia Barnard students created a daily women's tefillah group. 1997, Nishmat founds the Yoetzot Halacha program to train women to in Hilchot Nida to respond to questions in Hilchot Nida through a hotline, etc. 1997, Julie Stern Joseph and Sharona Margolin Halleckman are hired as congregational interns, a term that was invented for these two women, Lincoln Square Synagogue and at the HIR. In 1998, there's an estimated 60 women's tefillah groups meet regularly around the world. In 1998, there's a book called Jewish Legal Writings by Women, which is a collection of Jewish legal writings by women. But first, I think the first book containing halakhic essays written by women, I think, in history. In history, 1988, the Arya Frimer and Joe Frimer, the Frimer brothers, they published this very encyclopedia, Women's Prayer Service Theory and Practice, in which they really go through again the theory and the halakhic arguments and also what did Reb Soloveitchik say to whom and when and why, and conclude that that halakhically it seems to be okay. And Soloveitchik didn't condemn it, but he came to not like it so much, even though he never said it was usher. And that's basically the conclusion of a very lengthy essay with many footnotes. 1999, the first EDA conference on Orthodoxy and modernity. I'm pretty sure I was at that conference. I was really into EDA in the 90s. I had their mission statement taped up on the wall of my college dorm room freshman year. I was thought it was like really just kind of dorky, but like also kind of on brand for who I was in 1999. And it was yeah, it was all kind of exciting that there was this yes, there were the Rosh Yeshiva who were kind of right wing, and they were condemning these practices, but these practices were spreading, they were growing, they were taking place in Orthodox shuls. There was a sense, there was a group of congregational rabbis who were more open and liberal than the voices that were dominant in the 90s at Yeshiva University. And the Edah conference, I think, was a way to kind of shift some of that power back from the Rosh Yeshiva to these congregational rabbis, to lay leaders, to the community that was actually like open to some of these practices, wanted to engage in these conversations, and felt that expanding ritual roles for women in the synagogue context was a positive thing. And women's Hila groups, I think, was a major issue, my perception, around over which this debate was taking place, hitting these wings of the modern Orthodox community. And then out of that, I think YCT Rabbinical School was founded. Also emerging from that, I think the idea was, okay, like if there's a divide between what congregational rabbis are doing and presumably what their communities want, and what the dominant voices at Yeshiva University, so there's a need for another rabbinical school to provide rabbis for synagogues that are, currently, led by these more moderate rabbis. 2000, you have Joe Lieberman's nominated to be vice president, right? His Orthodox affiliation is seen as a positive thing, I think, by and large, mostly. 2000, New York Jewish Week exposes Baruch Lanner, who was a NCSY director, as being also horrific sexual abuse and emotional abuse of teens under his purview. So it was it's a scandal because he had operated for many years, and there were many opportunities to catch him, and he was caught, and he was sort of let off the hook by people very highly ensconced rabbinic leaders in the OU, and people at YU sort of knew about an earlier stage of abuses that he can, and then kind of let him apologize and go back to work for a second round of abuse. So that's why the scandal is particularly hard. I think it's sort of a moment, I think, again, in sort of shaking confidence in the establishment. I would say I think this is a moment. 2001, Mendel Shapiro publishes Kriyat HaTorah by Women, a Halachic Analysis. This is the halachic essay that sets the foundation for the partnership minyan movement, in which he sort of notes that the Mishnah says women don't. Mishnah says everyone gets an aliyah, but we don't call up women and children because of kavod tzibor. It's not fitting with the dignity of the congregation. And Rabbi Mendel Shapiro then opens up that discussion through the centuries and commentary by Rishonim, what exactly is this dignity of the congregation, and maybe it's contingent and not like one thing for all time, and maybe it can be waived by a congregation or a segment of a congregation that chooses to waive it. So just like a parent is allowed to set up a relationship with a child where the child doesn't speak to the parent in the third person, or rabbis are allowed to say, or set up a relationship with their students so they don't have to address them in the third person or stand when they enter the room, right? Some types of halachically mandated dignity can be waived, right? And so maybe this can be as well. Notably, he was an attorney, not a professional rabbi, not somebody who has like published other halachic essays before, but he wrote a well-researched paper. In 2002, Shiur is founded in Jerusalem as the first partnership minyan. this is pushing like the envelope on women's ritual inclusion in an Orthodox setting, sort of because it has, I'd say, kind of more. I should have found a really beautiful essay. I'll tell you that. I can send it. Um, Rabbi Jeremy Kamenofsky is a conservative rabbi in Manhattan, wrote an essay 10 or 15 years ago called Good Neighbors, I think. Sort of, it's a review of the Edah Journal, where many of these articles were published over a period of several years, writing from the perspective of a conservative rabbi looking towards liberal orthodoxy and comparing the conversations taking place in liberal orthodoxy from his perspective. I think it's absolutely fascinating. It's one of the best. It's like incredibly relevant to what we're talking about. I should try to find it. It used to be very easy to find. I should track it down and share it. It's really phenomenal. He writes about this essay and how impressed he was by how well researched it was, by how many footnotes it contains, by how many sources are quoted, and how that signifies that a community that is wrestling with ritual practices, but like deeply committed to doing so from a place of just like textual literacy and fluency, and that discourse is meaningful to the people having the conversation. It doesn't seem like a game. And and he compares it to some of the shuvot from the conservative movement in the 50s and 60s that reached the same conclusions, which were much, much shorter because they were convincing a community that didn't need as much convincing, didn't need that kind of, show your work and dot your I's and cross your T's.
Is it his thesis or?
That's his, Kalinowski said, yeah, that's his, well, he notices that in the essay.
And ascribes that reason to.
Yeah, like in other words, like he compares the debate taking place in the Edah journals, including around some of this essay in particular, and the response to an exchange of much shorter with many fewer footnotes that were published in the conservative movement, a generation earlier, 2 generations earlier, which
it's not a question that the reason is because you don't have to convince people like you're preaching to the choir, or
not preaching to the choir. He felt you should look. You could. Well, it's been a few years since I read it. We can read it together. He says it's. I think it's less about the comparison as more. He's using the comparison to say something that he's observing about liberal orthodoxy. That it's a community that cares about this discourse and cares about these texts and cares about the arguments. I think that's sort of the point he's making. That it seems like a vital and a real debate taking place about people that the stakes are kind of high to the people participating in the debates, and people are like marshalling, like bringing their their A team, to the. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Well, Carter's feedback, it was not, they didn't turn the switch overnight.
Oh, yeah.
There was a lot of study and
Yeah.
it was Machiavelli, and then it was everything after Shalishi.
Uh-huh.
And it was Shalishi and
Interesting.
and so forth.
Interesting.
And laning, and there was a lot of analysis. And
Yeah.
It took many years before
Interesting.
there was a woman,
Interesting. Very interesting. So, well, okay, in that vein. So 2001, Kilat Hadar is founded in Manhattan as an independent, gender egalitarian independent minyan. And I think it's sort of notable that Hadar also, even though like in a superficial way, their style of tefillah is quote unquote conservative, it was so important to my sense was very important to the leadership in those early, maybe even still, that they not be seen as conservative. That in terms of the aesthetics of their tefillah was very much not like the aesthetics you would find at a typical conservative synagogue. And I think they too felt that the halachic basis for their community had to be more rigorous than what they experienced in the conservative movement. Many of them were ordained. I know some of the people who are trying not to be too specific. I know more than one rabbi educator associated with Hadar who was ordained or spent many years at JTS and felt like really grateful to the like kind of academic Talmudic education they received there, but felt the halachic education was very minimal, and they felt halakha was also intellectually rigorous. It was an important spiritual language of the Jewish people. It was not an obstacle to be overcome. It was itself the site of real debates and dialogue and discussion about values of the utmost importance. And a number of them went to Orthodox yeshivas for their halacha education, and they brought that into Hadar. So it's something that's really, really different. And clearly not Orthodox and also clearly not conservative, and sort of operating and growing at the intersection of our communities. 2001, 2001. Oh, 2001 also. That was when Trembling Before God was released. Remember that? Anyone see that movie? Okay, I saw that in Peters. Okay, that was like a very, if you remember, like it was like over 20 years ago, the first real effort to draw attention to gay Orthodox Jews. There weren't, I don't think, gay couples raising families in Orthodox schools in 2001, but certainly not that I was aware of. Um, I was in college in 2001. I was an undergrad in 2001. I subsequently found out that like 3 or 4 of my classmates were gay, and they were all closeted through college. When I found out, like it sort of sat with me in a very, that they felt, even in a like a sort of a liberal Orthodox university community, they didn't feel comfortable being open about their sexual orientation as recently as 2001 or 2003 when we graduated. They were still closeted, and so that was that movie, which didn't really have a halachic agenda, didn't have any agenda of activism. It was just about awareness and telling stories. Really started something that has also continued to change our community. Been another like front line in how our community has evolved, and also some of the tensions and divides that areas of tension within modern Orthodoxy. 2004, Yeshiva University launches its graduate program, Advanced Semitic Studies at Stern College. The first venue for under Orthodox auspices for women to study Torah at a high level in North America, at a postgraduate level. In 2005, Dr. Zina Zimmerman publishes a lifetime companion to the laws of Jewish family life, the first halacha book written by a woman in the history of the Torah. Sort of a short book on Hilchot Nida, very good book. 2006, Rav Shagar, Shimon Gershon Rosenberg, dies. And at the time of his death, he was not very well known. But in the years since, as one of the kind of first religious thinkers to grapple seriously with postmodernism, his impact has grown. I think like 10 volumes of his books have been published since he's died. Several of them have been translated into English. One of them was donated to the Shul Library. It's still in my office, I think, actually. But and that's also, we haven't discussed all trends occurring in Israel, but there's obviously a lot of cross-pollination. And I think Shagar, like postmodernism and kind of breaking down of some of these grand narratives, as our community has splintered a little bit and gone in different directions. I think the influence of postmodern as a way to see the world, where we don't have we're not telling one story anymore. We can kind of tell lots of different stories. And Rav Shagar really leaned into that and embraced that and saw that as really crucial for Judaism to kind of thrive. His yeshiva where he taught, they're trying to schedule actually some like shiurim in the spring in partnership with our shul and several other shuls to kind of help spread his thought further. But I never met him, even though I actually studied in Efrat, like not that far from where he lived. I never met him. Like he was, like when he was alive, he had like 5 students. Okay, it was like not maybe 10, and now his books are bestsellers. 2006, ADAS ceases operations. They claimed their mission was so successful they could shut down. I think they also lost some big donors, which we can talk about off the recording. 2006, Mechon Hadar is founded. So Kilat Hadar sort of grew, and they created the Mechon where they teach and sort of eventually a yeshiva. 2006, the RCA decided to centralize Orthodox conversion in dialogue with the Israeli rabbinut. Instead of having every rabbi oversee his own conversions, they said, let's set up regional courts across North America. Every rabbi instead will become a sponsoring rabbi, will bring his candidates to the regional court. The regional court can therefore apply uniform standards and procedures. They'll be endorsed by the rabbinut, and then our converts won't be questioned. The rabbis won't feel pressure from wealthy balabatim to convert their daughters-in-law and things like that, and this will be better. Everything is centralized and uniform. And Rabbi Frendel is put as in charge of really setting up this entire system and negotiating with the rabbinut. That same year, the International Rabbinic Fellowship is founded, really in large part inspired to continue to support rabbis who want to do independent conversion. Really, all of the negatives of the centralized process were borne out over the decades since. It was a way for rabbis associated with these regional courts to accumulate a vast amount of power over other rabbis as well as over conversion candidates. Not all of them used that power in a ethical or wise way. And it did lead to questioning of prior conversions that were done before when they promised that it wouldn't. And so the International Rabbinic Fellowship was established to provide like support for rabbis who wanted to continue to do independent conversions. Also, the International Rabbinic Fellowship was a rabbinic organization that accepted YCT alumni at the time when it was becoming clear that the RCA had not and would not do so.
Does it still exist or centralized?
The RCA does exist. They continue to do their GPS, Gay Rich Protocol Standard. They actually thought of that acronym before the satellites. Gay Rich Protocol Standards.
It
So
took them a really long time to.
no, the 2006. I think it was before.
GPS is.
Really?
No, this goes back to the.
Really? Oh, well, no one was using the fine. I didn't know about GPS in 2006. I didn't have. Okay, never mind then. Okay. So whatever. What can I say?
You said it just took them 30 years to.
No. So yeah, it still exists, and it does still exist, I tell conversion candidates that if they, it has advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is you go through the process; it's very bureaucratic, not a lot of flexibility, but they're very clear about what they expect of you, and in terms of what you have to know and the behavior you have to conform to. And if you can do it, you end up with a certificate that will be accepted in almost any community where you're likely to live, and is very likely to be accepted in Israel as well. And a lot of people care about that. But I also support conversion candidates who want an independent conversion where a little more TLC, a little more flexibility, which might be necessary. And the risk of those that it's my name on the certificate, and who knows, 20 years from now, will anyone know who I am? What reputation do I have? And how, and there's a likelihood that it could be questioned depending on where people, so that's sort of, unfortunately, that's the reality. 2006, Dina Nyman's hired as Rosh Kehillah by Kilat Orech Eliezer in New York City. KOE was sort of, anyone go to KOE? Yeah, okay. It was like, and it was a big deal. Like 5 years earlier, like, in the 90s, it was like also one of the first independent minyanim. It was very vibrant, and Rabbi Halivni was the rabbi there. And then when he moved to Israel, they hired Dina Nyman. But already by then, between Hadar and Darchei Noam, the Halachic Igal, independent minyanim, and the partnership minyanim, all within the same neighborhood, sort of took away from both sides, like the constituency. And so it's very vibrant, it sort of dwindled. 2006, YCT withdraws its application for RCA accreditation, recognizing that there isn't going to be this merging, there isn't going to be this ability to work together. 2007, the Yated Na'aman, a Haredi newspaper, publishes its first of quite a few exposés of YCT rabbinicals, so it sparks a series of 2007. There's still blogs back then, and at one point, short time later, when I was working at Princeton, there was like a website that was devoted to attacking me. Even that was like it was just pretty, which our students thought was kind of cool. I was.
What were they exposing?
It was so interesting. I took it off the sheet because I just to save paper. I'm happy to share. I'm happy to share with you. It was the most amazing. The expose was entirely. They didn't do any like journalism. They didn't call anyone at the yeshiva and say, how do you respond to this? They didn't do like that sort of basic journalism. They did do like a internet search of everything associated with YCT and collected statements by alumni and faculty that they then quoted accurately and said, how outrageous, so somebody says we want to bring an innovative spirit to, energize the, Jewish community. Like, what they want to, how dare they say such a thing? It was like very, some things were controversial in the audience that Yated was, you say things in one setting, in a liberal Orthodox setting, or a Hillel rabbi says something in the context of like a pluralistic campus Jewish community, and then you take that quote and you share it to a, Haredi readership, and it gets people riled up, and that was the intention. I'm happy to share with you some choice quotes. So it was sort of funny because if you liked what the people were saying, you're like, oh, that's, this is great. Like it's all, they're quoting my teachers. They're, yeah, but like they would just like have these paragraphs and say, oh, dare they say that? It was like very, that was kind of, continue. All right. 2009, Sarah Hurwitz is certified as Maharat, and she then goes on to found Yeshivat Maharat. In 2010, Sarah Hurwitz changed her title to Rabbah, which then sparks a bit of a controversy. I think there was an article in New York Magazine that said something like Rabbi Weiss, ordained a woman, and nobody noticed, so he did it again, and then sparked a, like the title change was sparked a bit of a controversy. 2010, the RCA adopts a vote without dissent condemning female rabbinic ordination, but then the IRF adopts a position that same year to kind of offer a counter voice. I gave you both of those, I think, on this, the 2010. So the RCA convention resolution, April 2010, and then spring 2010. Like it was like a few weeks later, the IRF votes sort of a different. They're both on your sheet. I was at both conventions, and I think I voted in favor of both. So they're sort of I don't know, you can read it and say, I don't think they were really actually in controversy, I think because it was really, what I voted against and what I voted for the RCA was against the title rabbi as a bridge too far and too innovative and disruptive to tradition. And what I voted for later in the spring, that the IRF was in favor of teaching Torah and answering questions and serving as clergy, visiting the sick, and spiritual preachers, spiritual guides, right, and all those things. So I think in good conscience I voted for. But really, the RCA vote was trying to be a unity statement, and so that's why it was voted without dissent. I think in the end it didn't end up being. It was used as a cudgel, not as a conciliatory way. It's in the year since. So probably, I think a lot of people voted for it, regretted voting for it. 2010, the Statement of Principles on the Place of Jews with a Homosexual Orientation in Our Community. So this was also at the time a very groundbreaking position. Many, hundreds of rabbis, psychologists, leaders signed the statement. I think I have some excerpts on the sheet as well. Condemns conversion therapy, says people can be out and raise their kids in Orthodox communities. We have a duty to love everyone no matter what. Says, it doesn't matter if they choose to be gay or not. We still have to love everyone. I think, from in 2024, you read it, so some of the language is a little cringy maybe, or wouldn't use some of those terms, wouldn't say it that way, but it's staking out positions that are not at all universal in Orthodox communities even now. And in 2010, it was again a document that was heavily litigated, consensus document written by 3 of my teachers over a period of months, hashed out, and it was signed by important people. Like it wasn't, it signed it. You can still go out, you can find it on the web, on the internet. You can see all the signatures from those years. I want to skip ahead though. We're going to skip a little bit. Because I'd say these issues of fissure around gender and sexuality, like that continues to like play out really consistently throughout, from the 20th century into the 21st century, unto our own time. I think at one point I noted a few years ago that every like shul controversy that pertained to like our Orthodox identity, it was all about gender sexuality and almost entirely about what women do in public. And that was which is, when you step back, each individual issue, these are halakhic issues that have to be debated and deserve the dignity of, just halakhic and other evaluation. When you step back and look at the big picture and you say, like, every time we kind of come and question our boundaries as a community and what is Orthodox, what's not, we're always like defining that boundary by what women do in public. Like that's a little bit, it's more than a little bit disturbing, I believe. And I think I hinted at this before. Sometimes we emphasize like boundaries and ideology when we don't have content. I think I may speak about this on Shabbos, maybe next week. I don't know, but like it's in plate. Because we don't really know, we don't have like, what does it mean to be a Jewish woman in 5784? What does it mean to be a Jewish man in 5784? masculine. Like these are concepts that I think we are very much in question. We don't really have positive content of like my identity as like as a Jewish man and the model. What does that mean? What are my responsibilities? What's my, right? What does it mean to be a Jewish woman? I think we don't have clear answers to this question. So instead, we say, okay, it's about my identity as an Orthodox Jew who goes to an Orthodox synagogue. Women do this, men do that, and that, because it's making up for the lack of content. In contrast, I think we have a very clear sense for most of us of what Shabbos is supposed to look like. I think Shabbos is a concept that works very well in our contemporary Orthodox community. And so it just ends up not being something that we need to like police the boundaries with such ferocity, because some say mutter, some say usser, some do this, some don't do that. Like, it's important, obviously, very, very important, but it doesn't end up being, I don't think, like a fraught, doesn't raise the same fraught questions of communal identity. At least for most of us right now. Maybe like, in the 50s, the microphone question was raise these kind of right? Somehow hearing aids are okay, but not microphones. That's a sign of denominational boundary setting, okay? But it's the same thing, right? Yeah.
I experience it a little differently. The definition of Shabbat was very broad in our house. And,
Yeah.
and as I'm thinking about it, just thinking out loud, what women or men do or don't do in a public setting is a public discussion. And so it's a public identity. Whereas Shabbat observance, while there are community standards, it's typically what you do in the house. We fought all the time about swimming on Shabbat, right? And then, bikes, okay, we don't bike on Shabbat, but like, can you use a scooter? Oh, the rabbi's son uses a scooter. We normally say, no, you can't use a scooter. The rabbi's son is doing it. It was very fraught, but
Interesting.
But it was internal.
That's interesting. Okay, thank you. That's interesting. Okay, I want to say it's one of those great. Okay, this I'll save for a different time then. Okay, I have another handout I'll save for a different shiur, which will be relevant later. But the brief moment where I thought that maybe there's going to be like another way that we could define ourselves that didn't have to do with gender and sexuality was during COVID, when first of all, you saw a real divide between the non-Orthodox embrace of Zoom and internet technology for tefillah, for convening minyanim, for using Zoom on Shabbat even, and Orthodox communities really stayed away from it. I think that was like a clear dividing line around, I think, defending Shabbat, defending also our sense of like community requires proximity, and that we had the trust that we could just be apart for a couple months or a year or two even, and that we would come back together afterwards, and that we weren't going to undermine the value of proximity and living in community, even, for the sake of this short-term advantage. I think, and I think, to me, the liberal Jewish embrace of Zoom, it's like the 1950s driving tshuva, which looked like a good idea, but over a generation made it impossible to be a Shomer Shabbat conservative Jew in most places. I think the switch to Zoom maybe looked like a good idea, but in real time, it didn't take a generation. It took like 6 months, and it has, I think, eviscerated religious life in non-Orthodox communities, in that if you're a Park Avenue synagogue or a Central synagogue, so now you have 30,000 people who, sign on to your Zoom. Wow.
Okay, I say that what?
Really? So it's just 30,000 people on.
It's just the bar mitzvah family, 'cause there's always a bar mitzvah.
Yeah, wow.
And it's like
Wow.
mega church
Wow.
production.
Wow.
It's all,
Incredible.
It's all webcast.
Incredible. So that, to me, if I try to be a little editorial, I think that's like I think it's been a really destructive, again, I understand the good intentions, I understand the positives, et cetera. I think it's been really destructive. And I think I also kind of had this fantasy that maybe like the modern Orthodox, respecting Shabbat and respecting the value of we're only going to convene a minyan if we're actually, together in real life. And we're not going to break sort of compromise on Shabbos and also we're going to take the science really seriously, and we're going to, take with the municipal health codes seriously. And we're going to, that would sort of earn, like tremendous respect that would, redound to the credit of our community and lead to, just people flocking to modern Orthodox schools in droves, seeing our principled balancing of halacha and science, and so that.
We give ourselves credit.
So I also gave ourselves a lot of credit. I thought I was really, that it was the, when the RCB, it was March. I put it here. It was It was March 12th. The RCB, Real Council of Bergen County, shut every shul in Bergen County on a Thursday. That was like a big deal, right? Like there was not like it's like a serious, vibrant. This is Teaneck and Englewood, and yeah, right.
There was opposition.
There was opposition. There were great Purim spoofs. There was.
It's like a few days ago.
It was a few. Yeah, they closed on Thursday. That same day, I think Boston, Los Angeles, many other Manhattan, Riverdale, many other came a day later. Maybe we closed our shul on Friday the 13th. I think by Monday the 15th, I think every modern Orthodox shul in the country was closed. So Thursday to Monday, that's pretty good. And again, I thought that would be like this, and then the OU had in May that same year, the OU with the RCA put out these very detailed guidelines for reopening. Somebody was like the OU was like made for this moment, like really strict guidelines of about the knowledge of how yeah. But I was kind of optimistic. It was like a communal identity that was like leaning into respect for science, respect for human life, and also respect for halakha, and respect for Shabbat, and respect for in-person proximity and community, and not going to compromise any of the things. I'm going to muddle through, and that the community at the more yeshivish and Haredi communities that were not as careful about listening to municipal health guidelines, et cetera, they would be discredited, and they like by that so. It did not turn out that way. I do think we emerged from COVID in a stronger position than liberal Judaism, which I think they're reaping the whatever from the transition to as I say this with more of you, whatever, but it's not that we aren't, but there's going to be a real life minion in the other room, even though I'm so glad that you're here too. But I don't. But I think it was also a just very destructive time for modern Orthodox community. It also exposed some strengths of our community, it also exposed some weaknesses of our community. I think a lot of people got really used to not going to shul, and it took a long time for some people to come back. I think sleeping late, having a second cup of coffee is actually a very pleasant way to spend a Shabbos morning, and Shabbos Menucha, and it took a while for people to kind of get over that and relearn the good habits of we're going to wake up the kids on Shabbos morning, and we'll get them dressed, we'll have them breakfast, we're going to get out the door, we're going to go, and there was a collective action problem because maybe I go and then my friends aren't here, so I guess I won't come the next week, and then the next week my friends come, they don't see me, and so it took a long time. It took longer than I think many of us would have wanted. Yeah.
Combine the two threads of what you're saying. I have a number of women friends who during COVID became far less engaged with their Orthodox synagogues and haven't really gone back. And that's multifactorial, particularly during COVID, when so much was outside. They're often just either because of the family structure, you're sending one person and everybody else is behind, or you're literally we're no place for women in a lot of the outside minyanim, which wasn't true of the ones here that I experienced, but it was true across New York and many places. But also the fact that they were already disengaged, but just were in the habit of going anyway, and then they actually got to disengage and needed a reason to come back.
That's interesting.
And didn't find that reason.
That's really interesting. Erica Brown published an op-ed called "Where Are the Women?" and it was sort of noting this real disparate, disparate rates of returning to shul after COVID. I didn't notice that. I didn't see that, but it seems that you did as well.
Two of my good friends from Brookline walk every Shabbat morning.
Wow, it's still fascinating. I think they should come back to shul. They might like it. They might, but
we should make light of it because there's not more time for more, but I think that's making light of
something. Sorry, indeed, and I apologize to them and to you. Of course. That's really interesting. That is really interesting. Okay. It is time for us to daven Marav. Thank you so much for thinking these issues through with me, and the story continues in real time, right? As we make our own history. Right?
Go.
I think it's what you included in what